Here we are going to discuss about object-oriented PHP. Just the essential you need to work with coordinate and understand coordinate, especially inheritance, polymorphism. One of the polymorphism concept that is method overriding and some of the other concepts, right? So, object orientation is a broader scope. It has a lot of features like interfaces, abstracts, a lot of things. We are not going to explain everything. Just to understand stuffs in coordinator framework, because the main goal is to implement your project using coordinator. So uh, right. So let's start in simple uh, practical process, and also why call object orientation, because up to now we discussed some procedural concepts. So object orientation basically because we are going to see our software from the object point of view, which means we see our software as components. So for example, the screens, buttons, everything as objects. This is very convenient, familiar concepts. That is why it's fully popular over procedure, because when we work with our daily routine, we probably, certainly, we interact with objects, start into objects. For example, let's say you take a book, and then in such case, you becomes an object also, and a book becomes an object. And let's say a dog barking, and then you can see a dog as an object, and barking is uh, actually a method or the behavior of that object. And also there are some colors and weight, height, everything we can discuss as properties. So that is the nature of the object has methods and properties. Properties represents the feature of that object. For example, let's say a car. The car may have the color, number of wheels, the engine capacity, and so on. These are, we can explain as the properties. And then it shows some behaviors through which we can interact with that car. For example, it turns the engine on and runs, stop, horning, turn right, left. These are, we can consider as the activities or behaviors, or in object orientation we call method. That's the main idea. And uh, the other concept is, our main intention is to use objects. We can't start directly with from the objects, because to use an object or to interact with an object, we need to create that object. To create an object, you should have a specific, let's say mod, or structure, common structure, from which you can create an object. So that's common structure, or the blueprint, or the mod, we called class. So when we create object, when we implement object orientation, first we need to create that blueprint or the class. Then you, after creating a class, you can get a copy of, you can create a number of objects as you wish, right? And then you can set up the properties, and you can call the activities or the methods to implement that object. So creating an object from a class we called instantiation, and object we normally call as an instance of that specific class. So when we implement or code in object orientation, we need to start from class. Though our though our main purpose is to handling object, right? So the student little bit confused regarding these things, because in most cases we focus in our coding, we have to focus on creating the class, that blueprint. So then a student little bit confused why we call this object orientation, because in the word object orientation implies that the object is the main thing. So say in the object orientation, why we focus on classes? Because the object is most cases it takes very little time to implement, because we totally focus on classes. So that's the reason. That the reason is though we need to work with objects, without a blueprint we can't create an object. So that's the reason. So we need to start from class, right? So in here, first let's create a class. In here you can easily create a PHP file, and it has, I think, a PHP class file as well. So let's check other, and here you can select PHP class. You don't need to select this one. You can go with simple PHP file and you can create the class. But if you select this PHP class, you can get the structure, right? You don't need to type everything. So that is why I select PHP class and next. So I will add a name. So in here, I'm going to get a concept of, let's say, login part, right? So in here, I am going to create a class user. So I name this file as user, right? So then we can finish. Then you can see it generates the diagram, right? That is why I select that PHP class. It provides the main structure, right? You can easily delete these things. Here your class, right? Class user. Normally, when we define a class name, we use capital letters. Start from capital letter, right? To define a class, right? Then this is the area of your class. Within that, you can define your properties and your methods, right? Methods are simply functions, as we discussed previously. Under the function, you can write whatever code you need, right? First, we define property. When we create a property, it's simple variable, right? You can prefix this. We call access qualifier. It has three access qualifiers: public, private, and protected. I will explain later. Just the default access qualifier for the properties is private, right? So I will define private, right? So I assume for the user management, because I'm going to manage a user login, I need some properties like user ID. Here I use snake case, which means the first letter is simple, and then each word's first letter as capital, right? Also, if you need, you can use this way as well, right? However, I will let's go with this way, right? Yeah, let's go with this way, right? Use ID. Right, this one. Okay. The similar way, you can define user ID. Let's say private is user role, and let's say private s user status. Status would be enough, right? So then you can define what the behaviors you need. The default functional behavior is public. It has again public, protected, private. I will explain. Public, then function name. This is very totally exactly the functions, right? The only difference is you need to prefix your access qualifier, right? This explains the scope of this property of the method, right? Public, let's say login, right? Public function login, right? I don't need this is because this is just explanation. I don't need any data to get into the function, but you know, in normal login, you need to get these some of these properties. Let's say I also need private password as well. Okay, so then under this function, I will just echo user logged in, right? Okay, now we have created a simple class, right? Let's say in function. Okay. Then this is our class. Now the blueprint is ready, right? And then we need to use this function. To use this, use this class. To use this class, now you need to create an object from this class. We normally, in object orientation, we say we need to instantiate an object using this class. Then through that object, we can manage these things, right? Here's the example. Actually, in normal implementation, class creates as a separate PHP script and object creates another place. But for the demonstration, I'm going to define everything in C. If you create class files separately, then you need to first include that class file to your PHP script where you instantiate the object, right? But in here, just for the demonstration, I'm not going to make this kind of complication. I just demonstrate to create the object the same place and you demonstrate, right? Here, first we need to create the object from that class, right? This is my object, let's say user1. Then here's the way of creating an object. You see, you need to say new and your class name, user, right? And you can consider this as a function. Actually, though we haven't created such kind of function in your class diagram, every class has its own default constructor function. If either we can create it manually or otherwise it will work behind the scene as a built-in function. That's the function we normally call. That is why we, though we haven't created that function, it's available like that, right? The theory is the constructor. If we need specific matters with that constructor specific function, you can create. Otherwise, it will work as default, like that. When you called new object from that class, right? This is create our new object, right? Through this object, we can access these things. In fact, actually, you can access this function only. You can't access these variables because these are the private. If you have created a variable public, you can also access this that public variables through your object, like that. Let's say simply public test, and let's add a value test property, right? Then you can access this property from your object. First, let's call a function method from this object. This is the way you can say user1, then arrow, that is dash and less than sign, greater than, right? Arrow, and then function name. Our function name is login. Again, if you need, you can access that property as well, public property. Let's vardan that, right? Because it is not a function or something, it doesn't print by default, right? So let's use as user1, same way, and this time the property test. Note that the variable sign comes here, not here, right? Okay, that's all. Now it demonstrates how to call, how to create an object from your class. In this demonstrates actually how to create a class, how to instantiate an object, and then how to access the public methods and public properties from within that object, right? So let's go and check. We need to call user.php, right? So here and let's type here user.php. Now you can see this is it called a function, and also this is the function. So let's try to access another variable, right? Let's say we have the user ID, default user ID like 10. Let's try like that. User ID. Okay, let's see what happens. Let's change a little bit user password. Okay. Here you can get fatal error. You cannot access private property from within the object. So that is the behaviors of access qualifier, right? The private access qualifier, if you define property or function, which means method, as private, these properties and method you can access only from within your class, right? Because this is from private, you can access this one from within your this function, right? For example, let's create a function like that. Public function get. We normally say these common functions as getters and setters, right? Get user ID. Now it's public function. Then you can return. Now we are going to access or call a function or property from within the class. To access from within the class, we can use a specific keyword this. Because when you access a property or class from within the same class, there is no any object, right, to define. So you can say this, which means the same class, this, and then you can say user ID, our property, right? Now you can call get user ID. User1 get user ID method. Now you can see the value. So why we need such kind of mechanism? Why we can't define? Actually, this is not the best practice, right? We normally say this is the best way, right? Though this is allowed. Why? You may feel that why we need to do some extra workload to create a function and allow to access these properties from within the that function. We can easily define the public and allow to access the properties directly. This is not the way, because if you allow to access the properties such way, we can't control the matters, right? Because these object use outside the class, right? So anyone can create, suppose this variable, right? This is public. So anyone can create an object and assign the value to this property and retrieve the value without class control. Right? For example, let's say to add a value to that property, you may need some specific validation to check. For example, let's say use ID only digits. So if you define this kind of function, and let's say the same way you can define a function, public function set user ID. Yeah. Then you can ask to send the user ID as a local parameter, like that. Here, for the local variables, I normally use snake case. Okay, this one is camel case, right? Sorry, this is camel case. This is snake case, right? Then you can set this user ID and this user ID, right? Then before this one, you can make the required validation, right? And then you can say if, let's say after validation, you get the value for the status, you can say if the status is true, then do this one. Then you can, in this way, you can control the properties. It makes some security for your properties. So that is why we, as a practice, we are not allowed to access the properties directly from the object. Instead, if you need to retrieve the data, the same way when you retrieve the data, sometimes you are allowed to see this user ID only for the admins maybe. Then you can do that validation within this function. If you allow to access the property directly, you can't do any validation. That is why, as a best practice, we say the properties allow the properties to access through the functions. Again, the same way, access means editing or retrieving the data. So that's the concept. So that is why we use a private for the variables. I will remove this one, right? And then these are the why we defined functions as public. Essential, we need that part, because otherwise no one can create an object and access if you define this as private functions, right? So that is why we create functions as public by default. But let's say like that, let's say here you have this function. I said you first, before doing this one, you need to validate this value, right? So then this normal public function, need a supportive function. Before doing this task, to validate such kind of supportive function, if you need, you can define as a private function. And for example, the idea is, let's say within this class, you may have you need some supportive function to use one or more functions, public function. Then these functions you can define as a private function, because you don't need to show this function outside. This is just for support the public functions. these functions you can define as a private function. For example, let's say like that. Private function validate user ID, right? And then it takes S user ID, and see, you can understand this code. Return bool S user ID. In fact, I think it has a function bool var, right? Like that, right? Then you can say like that. If as this validate user ID, right? Then if it's valid, then do this one, right? Otherwise, you can say do this. Otherwise, else echo invalid user ID, right? Here has right like that. So for this main function, you need this validation, right? Can you understand this one? It takes the user ID and check whether it's empty or not. It converts not the value, it converts to the truth value of this variable, which means if it's empty, if you submit null or false, it evaluates as false and return. Otherwise, it has a value. This is not checking the digits. It may work for even some spaces as well. This is just demonstration. So, however, if it has a string with more than one character, then it will answer as a true. Or if it's true, it will add the value to that function, that variable. Otherwise, it will show invalid user. So this is the controller and the controlling ability. And this is how we use private function, because we don't need to show this function for the outside. Outside means the object. This is for only the support for the internal task, right? That is how we use private and public and the usage of these things, right? If we need, we can check these things, right? Let's say after user login, let's say first we call get user set user ID, right? Set user ID without any value. The first one, right? The second, let's say, so then here check the VADA. Then the same thing will send the user ID and then check what will happen, right? Here the first time it say invalid user ID because we haven't passed any string, and it keeps the same value, the default value here 10, right? So let's remove that one as well and see what will happen. Here none. Then the second time it has 10, the value 345. So this is the controlling mechanism provided by class. We normally call this one as the encapsulation. Encapsulation means you can, it has a couple of meanings, like the capsule. In medicine, it has a capsule. All the content we can include to one container and provide as a capsule. So that is the concept. It has the method and the accessing functions, everything as a single unit, and we can allow. And the inner behavior we can cover from the outsiders as well, right? So that is the idea of encapsulation, and also right. So this is the main structure, right? So also it has some specific function, index function. It will call, you haven't defined any other function, right? For example, so I think, yes, index function, let's keep it for the controller, right? So the other specific thing is, uh, yeah, the other specific thing is the construct. You don't need to define a constructor at any time, right? The constructor is the specific function. It runs automatically before all the other functions. When you create an object, first it checks whether you have defined a constructor, then it will implement that one. Otherwise, it will normally call the default constructor, we call, right? It defines by PHP. It nothing do anything, just to create an object. But if you have something to do whenever the object create, then you can use that construct. Especially, let's say you are going to define a script or class for the purchasing. Then before handling the every function, the underlying functions allowed only for the purchasing officer. Then you need to check whether the user role is purchasing officer before implementing any of the function of that class. So such case, you can define, you can set up the validation to your constructor to check whether the user role of the current user is purchasing officer. So then it implements before every other functions, right? So such kind of things. Also, let's say in here we need to define some default value or allow the user to define value. For example, let's say here's the way to create the constructor should be essentially public, right? Because otherwise your object couldn't access this, right? And then double underscore and construct. This is the way, right? Then you can let's say we are going to get is user ID. Let's say you need to get the user ID and user role whenever the object create, right? You need to force to provide these values whenever the object create. Then you can implement like that user ID and user role, right? And then you can assign these values to here, default values, right? User ID. Sorry, it should be this. Why? We need to set up the property user ID, right? Is user ID, and then is this user role is user role, like that, right? Now let's see what happened. Let's delete these things, right? What happened when we are going to create an object? Here it makes error. Why? The reason is now it calls our custom constructor, because we have defined our constructor. And in the custom constructor, essentially normal function, right? It has defined two parameters. These are mandatory parameters because we haven't submit any default value. So you need to submit the values, right? The user ID and then user role. Let's say admin Now you can do it without any. I'm not going to show the values. You can define get and set 10. You can get show the values, right? Otherwise, you can just simply var dump here and check what happened. Is this whether it has defined correctly, like that? Okay. Here you can see it has defined, right? So that is the way of the constructor. Again, we define constructor. We don't need to define constructor every time. Just you need to define a constructor if you need to do something before every function calling of this class, right? Maybe setting up this kind of values, default values to your properties, or any specific class level validations, those kind of things, right? If you need to load some specific library to implement this class, you can load it using the constructor, these kind of things, right? But if you need to do something within the only one, two function, you don't need to define this constructor, right? Let's say most of your function need to manage database, then you can define database connection function from with the constructor. So when someone create the object, the database connection is established. This kind of thing you can define under the constructor. So these are the main things of the class, right? Now I'm going to show you the inheritance. I will remove this kind of thing to make this simple, and I will remove these things as well. Okay, this is very simple. Now only one function. Then you can create a user one. Let's say just user, right? And then we can run the function user and login. Okay, here it works. No issue, user login. So let's say this is common user class. It represents almost all the common users task login. Then you have specific users. Let's say admin. So in here, the admin's part is, the admin is also, because admin also the user, what you need is, for the admin, you need to available almost all the features and matters related to your user, plus some specific admin related things. This is the real powerful feature of normal of object orientation. In your procedural way, what you need to do is you need to again repeat the users functions and features under the admin, and you need to, but here you can, if you need such kind of thing, you can define another class, not the simple isolated class. You can actually prepend the features and everything of your user class to that admin class. Because of our scenario, again, our scenario is we need to define additional specific class admin, but it's not isolated. We need almost all the features of the previous user class to available under this admin. But normal procedures, you need to get, you need to just copy everything and paste. You don't need to do that. You can join, you can merge, or you can get the users classes, feature, everything into admin class like that, right? Another class admin, right? we need to say extends. Extends means we are going to treat our admin class as a specific or the extension of our main user class, right? Extends user. In this way, the admin class available, you can the object when you create an admin class can access the everything of the user classes. Why? You have extends. This method we call is inheritance. Right? Inheritance means the admin class inherits almost all the features. It has some specific part, right? I will explain, but in general, almost all the, let's say, allowed features means properties and methods to this admin class, right? So let's define specific property. Let's say a method public function. Let's say my admin. Let's say show. Simple show, right? This is specific. Let's say go admin shows, right? Oh, show. Now, instead of user, I'm going to create admin, right? Now, here I have created an admin. This class, I have instantiated an object using this. But here, same way, I have called this function. But you can see there is no such login function under this admin class. But because we have extended this admin class from user, this login function is now available from the admin. It works, right? Let's go and see. Here, it's available, right? But just remove this part. Now, admin class is isolated one. There is no link to use. Now it shows uncaught error or to undefined method. Now its method is not available. That is the difference, right? So actually this is kind of reusability. Actually, why we have defined the inheritance is to make some specific class. Meanwhile, we need to get some properties from another class, right? So in this way, in this way we called this main class parent, the derived class or the class we extend from user we call child class, right? So this is the way. Then you can, now this is how private these things happen, right? So now it's okay. And then here I'm going to change this one as private. Now my function is, login function is private, but I have the same inheritance, right? So let's say what happened. Again, you can see the private method. Why? The reason is, as I mentioned, private functions and methods only available from within that specific class only. Even you have extend, it's not available to the child. That's the reason. If you have defined private, right? If you have defined protected, that is the new word, protected, then that method, let's say here, protected, right? Okay, sorry. Protected function. Okay, so protected, which means if you, these are the other access qualifier, right? The first one is private. Private means if we have defined private, you can access only from within that specific class is itself on. You can't access these properties and methods from within your child class or object. Protected means in between private and public. The public means from everywhere you can access from your object. The protected means it can be accessed only from the class itself. It's okay because it's protected. And also you can access from within your child class. So why this happen? We just access this one? No. We have to try to access that method from our object, not from the class. To access from our class, we can call like that. Right? We can say this. Let's check this one, right? Login. Then let's call show. Now let's see what happens. Now it's work. Why? The reason is this one. This is the way of accessing protected one from within your object. If you have defined protected, you can access these protected matters from within your child class. If you need to allow these things to access from outside, which means from object, you have to wrap that method with public function, because only the public functions and properties allow to access from within your object. Why we have defined this, or not we, what we have this kind of defined in object orientation to make the security. That is why we promote object orientation over the procedure, because in procedure it's very hard to actually implement this kind of things. So that is the public, protected, and private. Right? Again, if you have defined something private, you can access these things in the defined class itself only. If you have defined protected, then it's available to your child classes. And if you have defined as public, then it's available in classes, child classes, plus from the object. So these are things. Only one thing I need to show you is method overriding. We call polymorphism. Actually, the concept of polymorphism means you can call same action from within several objects. Then it results in a different outcome or the response. For example, let's say, let's assume an object window. Then we can call a function clause. Then it feels a clause in the window, right? It has one thing. And let's say the object bank account. Then we go say clause function, same function, but it's totally different. Closing and closing a window and closing an account are totally different things, but the same name, different behavior. That is we call polymorphism. Right? So in here, how to implement polymorphism? To make a polymorphism, you need to this is actually the polymorphism has two types of polymorphism. One we call method overriding and method overloading. Unfortunately, method overloading will not work with PHP, because in PHP you can't define same function name under the same class, right? But overriding is available. Here, let's see. This is public function login, which means it's available under this function as well. Then I'm going to define the same function under my child class, same function, login, right? This time I am going to say admin login. this is method overriding. Means because this is public, it's available under the admin child. From within the admin, I have override, or we call it override R. Override this parents function to make different behavior. This would be needful because sometimes the user has specific login function, but in this class, we need different login. Okay? We can override or we can actually this kind of overlapping, right? This kind of thing. Right? Let's call and see what happens. Let's make this one as admin, right? Admin, and here again this one is admin. It's admin and login. Login. Oh, so let's go and what will happen. Now you can see it calls its own function. This one, not this one. Why? The reason is polymorphism, and it calls it implements method override. If you create a function user, so extending or inheritance means doesn't mean you can't create an object for the user, because user is parent. If you create a object for the user, this part is not available because the inheritance is unidirectional, right? It comes from parent to child, not child to parent, right? So if you create an object using parent class, for the parent class, it will not available the matters mean the features in your child class, right? But if you create a child class, then it will inherit parents feature. It's allowed. Why I have said it's allowed means if it has some private properties or private keys, it not available, but the other things will be available, right? Okay, so here user. Now I'm going to create a user class, right? And then it's user login. Now here you can see it provides user login, right? Why? Actually, for this class, this will not available. So in here, this override the parent. Right? So these are the main concepts I need to show you in object orientation. In when you're working with CodeIgniter, you can see these features. You need to call the same way. Here, let's go your main project, right? So, and in controllers mainly the classes. Here you can see class home extends base controller, because in CodeIgniter when we create a control, actually controls class type of class. It's not object orientation type, the CodeIgniter controller type, right? Frameworks feature. When you create a controller, you need to extend that controller from within base controller, because this base controller includes almost all the necessary functions and everything to manage the frameworks, features, and everything you can use from within your controller class, right? And then you can see I have defined a function construct, and here I have implemented some of the function calling I need to implement whenever the other functions call. Here I have defined an index function, right? I will explain these things in explaining in CodeIgniter, right? Just to see here, I have used this. This means, in fact, I have called this request. Actually, this is an object get post some methods, right? But in here, you can't see anywhere this request object. But where it defined, it comes from your base controller. right? So you don't need to worry about the base control. Actually, base control is here, and you can see it extends the control. Actually, this is the real way of object orientation. You can, by using the extension or extending, you can define the specific class as much as you need, right? That is the way of extending an inheritance, right? This means, this object may have been created or instantiated somewhere in this hierarchy, because in extending multiple times, it makes a hierarchy, right? So in that hierarchy, it may be in the your base control, or maybe the controller. You don't need to know about this. You can just use it. Explains coordinator framework, and you can use, right? Just you need to understand, because otherwise you may think, I have defined this request, or where I haven't defined that request object so property in my home controller. So how it's possible? The reason is, that is why I have explained you this extending and inheritance, these features. Now it's clear. Though you haven't created, it has been created in somewhere in the hierarchy. You don't need to worry about these things, right? These kind of things you can see a lot of this session. Again, this is object. It has some set variables and so on, right? You can see a lot of this, and also you can use your own. You can define your own. Most of the functions are public ones, because you need to allow to access from outside. Actually, these functions we call from our browser side as HTTP request, and also it may have some, but in here it's very simple, and there may be some other specific functions. Actually, you may have some private functions as well. It's not here. Here, some private functions, supportive functions to implement from this part, right? Sometimes you may need to define these kind of properties, private properties to manage. Here I have defined module and module properties to identify what the module and what the module, these kind of thing. Here some in constructor I have add some. Actually, the parent construct have been called normally. If you have, it's a good best practice, right? If you have some parent also may have some specific functions rather than default function, you can call that one, right? And then you can search, and whether coordinator needs to define that one, or you can just ignore. And because it depends on the whether your base control has constructor or not, right? And this one, actually the validation one, because this allowed to this reports generation modules only allowed to the managers. So before calling every function from this controller, we need to check whether it's a manager or not. So I have added that one to the constructor, right? Otherwise, I have to call that function from every first line of every and each function under that public, only the public functions, right? No need to add this to the private functions, because private function calls from within this public function, but for the public function. So it's easy to add the constructor, or why it works, right? So that's the one thing. The other thing is it has this is we call instance methods and instance way. That actually it has two types of two ways: instance method and properties and class. That is for the instance means you need to first create a class, and then you need to instantiate an object, and then from within that object you need to access these properties, or basically the functions, that is the 99% unit. And the other side, it has static type class and static type method. For the static part, you don't need to instantiate that object. Instead, you can define the class name and double colon mark, and you can create ask the property or function without any object. It has its own usage, because in some cases, especially in libraries, some cases you don't need to create an object. Instead, you can get some services, right? So in some cases, you can see this kind of things, especially in Excel generation. I think it has the libraries, Excel. Here, this is the notation for static class, right? So the coordinate is a static class under the Excel library, and it has string from column index function or method. So because this is a static, how we know it? Because this is common static notation. This is the class name, and this is double colon and function name, right? But when we develop our own course, most cases we need to instantiate, and that is we probably 99% we use instance methods and properties, because we need to create an object and those things. In some libraries, you can get these kind of static classes. You don't need to worry about these things, because when you need something, when you examine the specific libraries documentation, it provides these kind of notations. You just need to identify why this, because this is static class and static method call, just to keep the nature of them. You don't need to prepare the static for these things, right? After that, if you need to go deep about the object orientation, you can study these things. As I mentioned, the interfaces, a lot of things you can actually you can when you create this kind of notation, everyone can extend. But let's say you need to mark this function cannot be extended, or this class cannot be extended. It has its own way. You can define it as a final one, which means if you have defined a specific class or method as a final, then no one can extend, right? So these are the specific cases. Actually, you don't need. So in here, my main idea is to give you some familiarity about object orientation notation. Otherwise, you may think why I have used this, or where is this keyword, those kind of things. Give the some background to be familiar with coordinates. Our main target is to understand coordinates. Right? So this background would be, I think, more than enough to identify and understand clearly the coordinated view. So the next class we can discuss we can start discussing coordinate. So I think you can do some practicals here and examine the given code with project code, and get familiar with these keywords and those things. You don't need to worry about why we have defined controller and those things, but you can go and identify this is a class, so I have extended this one with base controller, which means it has the parent class base controller. It may provide some additional facilities to my this class and those kind of basics. Right? So I think you understand these things clearly, and do the practical and come to next class. Thank you.